Okay, so thank you for showing up, everybody, everyone who's here, and then those who aren't will get the recording, whoever's registered. So the topic for tonight is, hold on, I just want to see, yeah, okay, everyone can shoot, okay. So the topic for tonight is why are our healthcare systems in crisis, okay? Because this is what we're hearing in the media about, long waits in emergency departments, staffing shortages, all sorts of different things that we're being told are behind our healthcare crisis. And it's not just here in Canada, it's all around the world. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm just going to introduce myself. So I'm Dr. Nouman Naeem, and I am a pulmonary and critical care physician. I'm also an internal medicine physician, but pulmonary and critical care are the two specialties that I primarily practice. And I have worked in more than 20 hospitals in 2 countries over the last 20 years. So I have some insight into what's happening in healthcare and the healthcare paradigm. And I'm also the author of this book, Healing from the Inside Out, Overcome Chronic Disease and Radically Change Your Life, which is based on my own research into what it truly takes to heal and to maintain your health throughout your life, from birth to the end of your life. Okay, so I have a lot to cover, so let's move on. So I don't know if all of you remember a movie called The Matrix. Okay, so I just want to introduce this topic by talking about this movie. The Matrix was a science fiction movie, and what it was about, it was about a world that was controlled by machines, and humans were slaves. Okay, humans were slaves, and the energy of humans was used to power these machines. And one of the characters in the movie was Morpheus. Now, Morpheus was looking for someone who he called the One, someone who would save humanity from slavery. And that person was Neo, played by Keanu Reeves. And when he found Neo, or the One, Neo was part of the slavery. He was living the illusion. So Morpheus offered him 2 options. You can either take the red pill and I will show you the truth and we'll see how deep the rabbit hole goes, or I will give you the blue pill and you can still remain in the illusion. So for those of you who have joined here today and those who have registered, I imagine that you want the red pill. You want to know the truth of what's going on. So I'm offering you the red pill, okay, to remove the illusion and remove the all the falsehood around this topic about what's happening in healthcare. So it's no secret to anybody that healthcare is in crisis. I mean, if you live in Canada, you hear it in the media all the time, news headlines, and you're hearing about this happening all over the world, actually, in the United States, even in countries that have more resources than we do. United States is mainly. And what the media is telling us is that this is a post-COVID phenomenon. So what they're saying is that, because of the pandemic, healthcare resources have become depleted because all the resources had to be funneled towards a pandemic. And some of you remember seeing a curve like this during the height of the pandemic. So what this is on the y-axis is the number of daily cases and days since the first case on the x-axis. And what they basically were worried about with the pandemic was the healthcare system capacity, the capacity of the healthcare system to handle a surge, okay? And what they were worried about was with the pandemic, hospitals would become overwhelmed, the healthcare system would become overwhelmed. So this is why they canceled elective surgeries and other elective procedures in order so that the bulk of the resources could be devoted towards treating people with COVID-19, especially those who are critically ill. Now, the thing is that I can only speak for Canada, right? Because I only worked here. Actually, I did work in the United States during the pandemic as well for a few weeks at a time. So I can speak about North America. I can't really speak about any other parts of the world, but we never reached a crisis situation, at least here in Canada, where all our ICUs were full, all the hospital beds were full, and there was nowhere to put anybody. And someone could argue that it was because of the protective measures that were put in place, okay, because we had canceled elective surgeries. But the thing is that long before this pandemic, there were times when we have come close to reaching healthcare system capacity, because chronic disease has been on the rise for decades. And the complexity of the patients that are getting admitted to the hospitals these days is exponentially increasing. And more of them are becoming critically ill. And ICUs are, especially in Canada, they're usually full for the most part. You may have maybe 95%, 5% capacity at times, but usually they're full. So when they're telling you that during the pandemic, we nearly reached healthcare system capacity, they weren't telling you the truth, because we nearly reached healthcare system capacity for years and years before the pandemic, okay? So that capacity has actually been reached many times before, long before this pandemic. Now, what we're being told as to what's happening now is that because of overwhelm and burnout, a lot of healthcare workers have left the field, especially nurses. And this is just one statistic here. They're predicting 500,000 nursing retirements in the United States by the end of this year, and a shortage of 1.1 million nurses by the end of this year, okay? So what they're telling you is that the biggest reason for our healthcare crisis is a staff shortage. Now, I'm not denying that there is a staff shortage, there is, but this is only part of the problem. And burnout is a major issue, but burnout is not something that is unique to the pandemic. Burnout has been going on for decades, and there are many, many reasons for burnout. The main reasons being that there are increasing pressures on nurses, on physicians, on other allied healthcare staff because of the complexity and the acuity of the patients that are being admitted to the hospital, right? So let's dive in now to look at the factors that have led to the healthcare system crisis. And the first factor I would say is the removal of traditional healing from medical education. And this started actually in the early part of the 20th century. So there's a man by the name of J.D. Rockefeller, and J.D. Rockefeller was America's first billionaire. And he was an oil tycoon. He owned a company called the Standard Oil Company that controlled 90% of all petroleum all petroleum refineries in the United States. This company later went on to become Exxon, Chevron, Mobil, all oil companies that we are familiar with. So around this time that he, his business was prominent, there was a lot of discoveries being made in the medical field, especially in the area of pharmaceuticals, discovering vitamins and how to make synthetic vitamins. So he realized an opportunity that petrochemicals, they were already being used to create plastic products, but they could be used to create pharmaceuticals. And he foresaw this opportunity with the rise in pharmaceuticals that petrochemicals could be used to manufacture them. So, but there was a problem. The problem was that at that time, 50% of what was being taught in medical schools was natural medicine, herbal medicine, indigenous healing, Ayurveda, naturopathic medicine, all these non-allopathic forms of healing were being taught that we've been using for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So he saw this as an obstacle to him making profit off the pharmaceutical industry. So he devised a plan. So he hired a contractor named Abraham Flexner to write up a report. and presented to Congress in the United States. And that report said that all these non-allopathic modes of medicine and healing, such as naturopathic medicine, chiropractic medicine, herbal medicine, homeopathy, and other forms, were non-scientific and they were quackery because they had not been studied in randomized controlled scientific trials, even though that they had been around for thousands of years. So Congress essentially took that report and changed the laws around medical education. So they made allopathic medicine the main form of medical education. Now, because J.D. Rockefeller was a billionaire, he could fund these medical schools. So he agreed to fund most of these medical schools in the United States under one condition, that they would no longer teach these other forms of healing, naturopathic, homeopathy, ancient traditional Chinese medicine, and osteopathy and all these other forms. So he managed to remove traditional healing and all these other ancient forms of healing from medical education. So medical education became mainly about teaching about prescribing pharmaceuticals and surgeries and procedures. And this is what it is to this day. Going through medical school, you don't learn anything about any other traditional forms of healing or any of the other ancient forms of healing, indigenous healing. All you're taught is about these things, pharmaceuticals. Now, this is from a study that was done looking at patients who were diagnosed with high blood pressure, known as hypertension, and their adherence to medications over time. So this study started out with 4,700 patients. They were prescribed a medication, any number of different medications are prescribed for high blood pressure. What you see is by about a year, 50% of these patients have stopped taking their medications, okay? And I don't have it here in this graph, but there are a lot of different reasons why the patients have stopped their medications. They included side effects of medications, included no perceived effectiveness of these medications, symptoms of hypertension persisting, all sorts of reasons. So this was a major study showing that for one of the most common conditions that we treat as physicians, which is high blood pressure, by 1 year, 50% of patients have stopped taking their medications. So can you imagine for other conditions like diabetes and heart disease and asthma and autoimmune diseases, what the compliance rate must be for medications? Now, I didn't want to go through all these different conditions. I wanted to give you this as an example of what actually happens in patient care. The adherence to pharmaceuticals is very poor. And it's because I believe that patients realize that only their symptoms are being treated. The physician is not getting to the root of the issue, why they have the high blood pressure or whatever condition is being treated. Now, the thing is that I'm not saying that patients don't need medications at some point in their illness. Sometimes patients get it for using high blood pressure as an example. Sometimes patients get admitted to the hospital with a severely high blood pressure we call hypertensive emergency. And then we need to bring that down fairly quickly in order to prevent stroke and heart attacks and other complications. But what I am saying, that pharmaceutical treatment needs to be part of a more holistic approach to health and healing, which includes herbal medicine, nutritional medicine, lifestyle and behavior, mind-body medicine, manipulative therapies like osteopathy, chiropractic medicine. It needs to be part of this integrative medicine wheel. Essentially, what J.D. Rockefeller did was he removed all these different modes of healing from medical education. So it's just what we've already discussed, pharmaceuticals and procedures. And this is one factor which has led to our current healthcare crisis. So let's go on. Let's talk about toxins. We live in a very, very toxic environment. And this is all because of the industrial age. right? Which started in the 19th century with the advent of manufacturing and the production of consumer products. And World War I and World War II, where the machines of war had to be produced in large amounts. And, this is what most of the factories were producing during those times. And what has happened, post World War II, is that those same factories started producing consumer goods, and it was the age of consumerism, and it is estimated that we take in hundreds of thousands of toxins on a daily basis, and toxins come from many sources. So they come from the environment, polluted air from factories, auto exhaust, solvents, heavy metals, pesticides. There's lifestyle toxins, which come from dietary choices like the fast food that we eat, the processed food that we eat, alcohol, nicotine, recreational drugs, all the different additives and artificial flavorings and preservatives in food, and sugars. And then there's internal toxins as well. Things like bacteria, yeast, fungal overgrowth, which are all related to nutrition. And then there's other toxins such as stress, unresolved trauma or abuse. And we're going to be talking about this a little in more detail. So, we tend to think that our drinking water is safe and it is clean, but it is far from the truth. It is estimated that 20% of US water systems have unsafe levels of lead. There's a cancer-causing chemical, chromium-6, that was the topic of a famous movie called Erin Brockovich. And it is estimated that it contaminates water supplies of 75% of Americans. Drug residues are commonly found in our drinking water, because people throw out their medications, they flush them down the toilet instead of getting rid of them the way they should. And between 5 and 17 million Americans are exposed to percolate in their drinking water, which is a chemical from rocket fuel. So we have toxins in our drinking water and we think it's safe. The food that we eat, fast food, especially in Western culture, North American culture, is very prominent. And it is so toxic. It's not even food. I don't even consider this food. It's not what we ate hundreds of years ago. Sugar, I don't even know why sugar is allowed to be manufactured and sold, because sugar has absolutely no benefit. Sugar is the most addictive substance on the planet, more addictive than cocaine. And there's so many toxic effects of sugar. Here's a slide that just summarizes some of them. Suppresses immune cells, contributes to fatty liver, accelerates cellular aging, impaired memory and dementia, oral inflammation. I'm not going to go through all of them. Increases risk for cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, behavioral problems. So there's so many toxic effects of sugar, but think of all the foods that we buy that have sugar in them, right? All the processed foods. In fact, there is like a collaboration between the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry to actually get people hooked on food that's not good for them. And we all know that, unhealthy nutrition, poor nutrition is linked to chronic disease. And when patients develop chronic disease, then they turn to their physicians who prescribe them pharmaceuticals. And there is a collusion between the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. They're all in collusion to increase profits of the pharmaceutical industry. And if you don't take my word for it, just research it for yourself. You'll find that information if you dig deep enough. So, sugar is one of the most toxic substances, and we take it in almost on a daily basis. Let's talk about one type of toxin, which is heavy metals. Heavy metals are found in many sources. Pesticides and fungicides, which are sprayed on all the crops, here in North America. There's mining, textile industry, from paint, batteries, automobile emission. How many of us are exposed to automobile emissions? Most of us live in urban environments. many sources of heavy metal toxicity. And if you look at heavy metals, they've been linked to so many different conditions, neuromuscular conditions, anemia, heart disease, respiratory illness. They've been linked to, mental health, not gastrointestinal disorders. So this is just one class of toxin that I'm talking about. They've been linked to so many conditions. And I believe that a lot of neurodegenerative conditions, such as Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, that we don't really have the cause for, although there is some genetic predisposition, but majority of people who get these conditions, they don't have a genetic predisposition. So I believe that it is related to some degree of heavy metal exposure. So the fact that we live in such a toxic environment and we don't have an effective way to deal with toxicity, right? The medical profession does not, doctors are not taught how to deal with toxicity, how to remove these toxins from the body, because we're exposed to them all the time. This is the second factor that has led to where we are in the healthcare crisis, okay? Now let's talk about trauma. Now, when we think about trauma, what we think about is somebody who has suffered a physical injury of some sort, a motor vehicle accident or a shooting or a stabbing, and they have multiple injuries. They may have a punctured lung, they may have broken some bones, they may be losing blood from a ruptured spleen. This is what we think of as trauma, but a trauma has a broader definition, and there's nobody who's immune from trauma. And I'm going to show you that in the next few slides. So what is trauma? Trauma results from an event or a series of events or set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. This is what trauma is. And if you look at this definition, there are very few people who are immune to experiencing some sort of trauma in their lives. And, trauma in the medical field is traditionally known as adverse childhood experience. An adverse childhood experience is exactly that, and is any negative experience that people experience early on in their life. And I'm going to go the next slide. I'm going to show you what all the different, and just for the sake of time, I'm going to refer to them as ACEs. I'm going to show you what the ACEs are. But there was a study done that was sponsored by Kaiser Permanente, which is a health maintenance organization in the United States. And they surveyed 17,000 participants. Okay. And what they found was that a quarter of the female participants suffered sexual abuse, and more than a quarter of the male participants suffered physical abuse. Now, these are major adverse experiences that we think of when we think of adverse childhood experiences, but there's a whole category of them. The bigger ones are like physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, but there's also physical neglect, emotional neglect. A lot of people may not have been sexually or physically abused, but they were neglected in their household. Then there's household dysfunction, incarcerated relative, divorce, mother treated violently, substance abuse, and mental illness. Now, why are adverse childhood experiences important when it comes to what's happening in healthcare today and chronic disease? It's because this study went on to look at the effects of ACEs. So let's look at the next slide. So this is the prevalence of individual ACEs, and this is looking at one state, Minnesota, in 2011. And what they found was they're quite prevalent. I mean, verbal abuse in more than a quarter of households, drinking problem in a quarter of households. And, everything else is a little less prominent, but still significant numbers here. So this is a graph which shows the ACE score on the x-axis and the rate of prescription of antidepressants, right? So as your ACE score goes up, so this refers to the number of ACEs that a patient has experienced, they get prescribed more antidepressants. So this is a chart showing the relationship between an ACE score and the percentage of adults who are alcoholics. So as the ACE score goes up, if you have 4 or more ACEs, there's a 16% chance that that person will become alcoholic, according to this study. This is looking at COPD, which is known as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is smoking-induced lung damage. And basically, as your ACE score increases, the percentage of people with COPD also increases. And this may also be related to the fact that people who have more ACEs tend to smoke more, because smoking is a huge risk factor for COPD. But nevertheless, the more higher your ACE score, the higher your chance of getting COPD. And this is a very good graph or chart that shows the probability of outcomes. So given 100 American adults, I mean, this is remarkable. Only 1/3 had no ACEs. 51% had 1 to 3 ACEs, and 16% had 4 to 8. And look at some of these numbers. So if you have no ACEs, you have a 1 in 16 chance that you'll smoke. But if you have 4 to 8 ACEs, there's a 1 in 6 chance. Look at heart disease here. We already talked about alcoholism. 1 in 14 with no ACEs has heart disease, but 1 in 6 has heart disease when they have 4 to 8 ACEs. And the risk of suicide goes up dramatically with ACEs. So my point I'm trying to make is that these adverse childhood effects, actually, sorry, I'm just going to go back to the previous slide. These ACEs have a strong correlation with chronic disease. And we all suffer with some sort of trauma in our lives, even if it's minor. The medical profession has no way of dealing with this. They have no way of dealing with trauma. And this is another factor that has led to the healthcare crisis that we have right now. And there's the issue of ancestral trauma. So there's no part of the world that is not free of ancestral trauma. Look at Europe. They went through World War I and World War II. Think of all the dictators that have ruled in different parts of the world, in Russia, in China, in Cambodia, Pol Pot, that have killed millions. Look at Africa, all the poverty in Africa and starvation, and colonization by Britain, France, and Spain in different parts of the world, the colonization by the Spaniards in South America, and suppression of those populations. So ancestral trauma is another form of trauma that is real. And this is a study that was carried out in 2014, which proved that you can model ancestral trauma in an animal model. So what they did was they took mice and they gave the mice an electrical shock. And at the same time, they gave that mouse a noxious stimuli, some sort of scent, okay, at the same time. So what they did was they looked at the next generation of mice, their children. And what they noticed was these mice did not have to be given an electric shock, but when they were given that same noxious stimuli, that same scent, they had the same fear response that these original mice had. Then they looked at another generation. They looked at the grandchildren of these mice. And even that generation did not have to have the electric shock to have that fear response, just that same noxious stimuli, that same scent. So this goes on to show that ancestral trauma is real. And it is one of the ways that trauma is perpetuated through generations. And we have no way of dealing with this. So let's talk about the fourth reason why we have this healthcare crisis, which is a bigger pandemic than COVID ever was, which is the pandemic of stress. We live in a very, very stressful society, right? At any given time, there are so many things demanding our attention. We're being pulled in so many directions, and technology has actually made it worse. And there are many sources of stress. There's fear, there's trying to please people, there's marital problems, unhappiness with work. Then there could be relationship problems, there'd be moving, abuse. Then there's major things like divorce and loss of a loved one. and family conflict. So there's all sorts of different stressors that we're exposed to on a regular basis. And what happens with chronic stress? So the thing is that, acute stress is something that we experienced, our ancestors experienced. When we were living as hunter-gatherers, we need to be worried about predators and other enemy tribes and that sort of thing. So when we had stress, it was an acute stress. It wasn't a chronic stress. In the modern society, we have chronic stress. What happens with chronic stress is that there is an organ called the hypothalamus, which releases a substance called CRH, which stimulates the pituitary gland, another gland in the body, which releases ACTH, which stimulates the adrenal gland. And the adrenal gland releases the stress hormones, which are glucocorticoids, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. And what happens is that if you're always under chronic stress, you're always releasing these substances. And these substances are only meant to help you deal with a threat or a danger or an acute stress, not to always be circulating in our system. So when you're always under have this epinephrine or epinephrine circulating in your system, you're always going to be in a kind of heightened state of alertness, and you're going to it can elevate your blood pressure, increase your heart rate, and lead to all sorts of chronic health conditions. Glucocorticoids can increase your blood sugar. Okay, and that leads to the release of insulin. And we don't want spikes of insulin. We want to have a steady release of insulin throughout the day when we have meals, but not have insulin released at other times, because increasing insulin secretion has been linked with chronic disease. This is a diagram of the physiology of the autonomic nervous system. So when we talk about chronic stress, we're talking about the sympathetic nervous system, which is activated in chronic stress. It's the fight or flight response, right? Which activates when we are facing danger. And we need to be in a parasympathetic state. A parasympathetic state is a rest and relaxation state. And this is the healing state. But when we're under chronic stress, we are in a sympathetic state, and we're only meant to be in that for a very short period of time to deal with the threat or the danger. I was recently on safari in Africa, and I witnessed, a cheetah, hunting. Actually, hold on. I think someone may be trying to get into the. Let me just admit someone else. Okay, so I witnessed a cheetah. Capturing a prey. And what I noticed is that, those prey animals, gazelles, they're relaxed in their environment. They're always in a relaxed state. But when they face a threat, they face a danger, like that cheetah or a lion, then they go into the sympathetic response. They go into the fight or flight response. It's flight for them because they can't fight the cat. And once they have escaped and they've gotten out of danger, then they let go of all of that, that energy that was generated during the sympathetic response, and they go on with their lives. But human beings don't do that. When we're in chronic stress from all the different things that demand our attention on daily life, we remain in that sympathetic state, and we're always firing off those stress hormones, and that causes inflammation and can lead to chronic disease. So this is a graph which shows the duration of a chronic stressor versus the percentage of people who get colds. And what you see is people who have a chronic stressor versus no chronic stressor have a higher likelihood of getting an upper respiratory infection or a cold, in this, also known as a cold. And the longer the duration of the chronic stressor, the higher the likelihood of developing an upper respiratory infection. And this is a graph showing, looking at depression score versus the rate of heart attacks in 1,000 people. And what you see here is that the higher the depression score, the higher the rate of heart attacks, because depression is a form of stress. So this is just showing how stress can lead to acute and chronic illness. So just to summarize, what I talked about today is that these are the factors that have led to the current healthcare crisis that we're dealing with. Hijacking of medical education, to remove all other forms of healing, herbal medicine, homeopathy, Ayurveda, naturopathic medicine, osteopathy, and to just focus on pharmaceuticals and procedures. The proliferation of toxins in our environment. We're exposed to hundreds and thousands of them, and the medical profession has no way of really dealing with them. It's not something that we're taught in medical school. We're taught how to deal with a medication toxicity like a Tylenol overdose, but we're not taught how to deal with all of the toxins that we're exposed to. Trauma. We talked about trauma, and we talked about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and chronic stress. Okay, so these are the reasons why we are in a healthcare crisis, not what we're being told by the media. Certainly, healthcare burnout and healthcare staff shortages are a factor, but the reason they're a factor is because there is an exponential increase in the rate of chronic disease and acute illness in hospitals. And what you're seeing is, if the current trends continue, this is a graph which shows that by the year 2030, nearly half of Americans, this is looking at American data, will have at least one chronic condition. 50% of Americans will have one chronic condition within 8 years from now, okay? And this is the main root of our healthcare crisis. So the question now is, what is the solution, right? I mean, what is the solution to this problem? I've laid out the problem, but what do we do about it? So you need to keep educating yourself, because there's going to be no major shift in healthcare or government policy towards healthcare in the next few years, not even in the next decade. I don't see it happening. That's why it has to happen at an individual level. You need to look after your own health. You need to educate yourself. You need to educate yourself about nutrition, about movement, about getting adequate sleep, about herbal medicine. You need to educate yourself about, traditional forms of healing. You need to educate yourself about mind-body medicine, meditation, stress management, breath work, all these different things that, medical students are not taught, and physicians do not teach their patients. You need to educate yourself, because you're not going to get this knowledge from your physicians, right? And it takes work, it takes time, it takes effort, but this is the only way you're going to be able to protect your health in these challenging times. And it's not just about educating yourself, but it's about taking action, because knowledge plus action equals power, not just knowledge itself. So you need to not only educate yourself, you need to actually take action on that knowledge. So I'm going to show you a slide here, which is going to be part of that education that I'm talking about. So when we think of our health, or when healthcare professionals think of health, they usually thinking of just the physical realm, right? They're thinking about the physical body, what's happening in the physical body, what's happening at the cellular level. But we all know that we're not just physical beings. So when you're looking at holistic health, about dealing with the entire person, you need to not just consider the physiology. You need to consider the mental self, which is the mind. And the mind is divided into the subconscious mind and the conscious mind, because a lot of our traumas, the traumas that we experience, or those ACEs I talked about, can cause blocks in the subconscious mind, and they can adversely affect our health. So we need to look at the mind. We need to look at emotions. We are not our emotions. Our emotions are how we experience life in this physical realm. And emotions can directly affect health, because a lot of people tend to suppress their negative emotions. When you suppress your negative emotions, they're going to become trapped somewhere in your body and lead to symptoms. We need to experience all the emotions that come our way, both positive and negative. So this is another aspect of who we are. The deeper aspect is the vibrational self. What do I mean by vibrational self? What I'm referring to is energy. Because if you look at who we are, we're made of cells. Cells are made of molecules. They're made of atoms. Atoms are made of subatomic particles. If you break down subatomic particles, quantum physics tells us that 99.129% of those subatomic particles are empty space. And the rest is matter. What does that mean? All that means is that we're just a vibrational frequency. And our illusion, as the illusion we have of being solid beings, is just an illusion, right? Essentially, we're just energy. Then we need to look at consciousness. Consciousness is the core essence of who we are. Some people refer to it as being, awareness, soul, spirit, but we need to get to the essence of who we are, which is consciousness, which is the purpose of meditation, right? Meditation, the purpose of it is to shed all those superficial layers of who you think you are, get to the core of who you are. So when you're thinking of educating yourself about health and healing, you need to consider all these different levels of who you are: physical, the mental, the emotional, the vibrational, and the consciousness, right? Any form of healing needs to incorporate all these different levels of who we are, because that's what makes us whole. Healing, the root of the word healing is whole. That's what it means. So I'd like to end by just one of my favorite quotes: "Do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." And I'd just like to thank you for listening. And this is how you can contact me. And I'm going to, we're at about 48 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. I'm going to allow anyone to ask me questions about what I presented today. So feel free. You can either, if you don't want to ask, you can ask the question in the text, or you can unmute yourself and just ask me, through the audio. So yeah, I'm going to give some time for questions right now. So I'm going to ask anyone who wants to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself, but I'm just going to ask a question myself. One of the solutions that I thought of to help people educate themselves about their health, about healing, about well-being, is possibly starting a subscription site, of a membership site with a nominal monthly fee, where I would offer like 2 webinars a month, similar to this, with a chance to ask questions, plus a third session where it would just be an open session where people can discuss any issues they have related to their health or in general. And I just want to know, like, is this something, I know there's not a lot of you on this webinar right now, but I just need to survey a lot of people before I go ahead and commit to this. Is this something that any of you would find interesting, or would you be interested in something like that? A membership site where you would have access to 2 sessions, maybe 2 or 3 sessions a month, where you would get valuable information to help you in your health journey and your healing journey. Just type a Y if you'd be interested, and it'll just give me a kind of an idea if it's something I should pursue. But I'm going to be surveying my bigger email list about this. Okay, so it doesn't seem like it's something that people would find valuable. That's okay. It's I don't want to put my effort into something that people are not going to take advantage of. So that's important for me to know. Any questions from anyone about anything I've discussed? I think, are you unmuted, Gabriella? Did you have a question?
Yes, yes. Dr. Nauman, thank you so much for this amazing summary.
For sure.
You included all the important areas, and I really appreciate the explanation with the history
Mhm.
of how the medical education changed
Yeah.
with the Rockefeller.
Mhm.
And I can attest that in Europe, this change of course for the worse was much later.
It was much later. Yeah.
Yes, in Europe.
No,
So the doctors were trained a lot more holistically until quite recently.
really. Yeah. Because the information I gave was for North America, right? I didn't
Yes,
have the information for Europe, but I think it's been a similar trend around the world, to be honest.
yes. And my question is, so yes, I would be very interested if you start a subscription,
Okay.
because even I studied a lot for myself. The way you explain is so deep and simple
Yeah.
time. So it's an amazing uh,
Okay.
for
That's good to
me
hear.
personally review and also learning a lot of new things. My question is
Yeah.
regarding the toxins and the emotions that get trapped in the
Yes.
body unconsciously. If you can elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah. So what happens is this. So the thing is that as human beings, like we're going to experience the whole spectrum of emotions that life has to offer, right? It can be everything from the greatest the emotions that people desire, like joy, ecstasy, peace, those things. And then there's the negative emotions, things like sadness, grief, despair, anger, those things. And the thing is that emotions usually arise from one of two things. Emotions arise out of an experience that we're going through or a thought. It's a response to a thought in our heads. Okay. And the thing is that we don't always have, to some degree, we have control over our thoughts to some degree, but a lot of people don't have control over their thoughts because most of our thinking is subconscious. So all these thoughts arise subconsciously. We have no control over them. We have some degree of control over our experiences, but only to a certain degree, right? Because how many times does it occur that something unexpected happens in your day, right? Something unexpected happens. I mean, it could be as simple as somebody snubbing you at work, or it could be something like someone cutting you off on the highway, or it could be anything. It can be a little thing, it could be a major thing. So the thing is that we are going to experience negative emotions on a regular basis. It's not going to be just like once in a while. It's going to happen. We also are going to experience the positive emotions. So I don't want to make it sound like we're not going to experience those. The thing is that the problem arises when you try to suppress those emotions. When you suppress negative emotions, what you're doing is you're not allowing yourself to feel the pain of those emotions, but you're causing suffering, because what happens is that those emotions get lodged in your body and they become trapped. And the thing is that they manifest as symptoms. Okay. So you need to allow yourself to feel those emotions. A metaphor I use for an emotion is a hurricane, right? A hurricane is an incredible force of nature that comes and completely just devastates an area. Same as a negative emotion, it can be devastating. But if you allow yourself to experience that hurricane, what happens when you get to the core of a hurricane? In the core of a hurricane, there's a place where there is nothing, there's no wind, there's no rain, it's just a kind of a tunnel within the hurricane, which is just a place of just peace until you pass to the other side. The same thing with the negative emotion. When you allow yourself to feel that negative emotion, you get to the core, you get to the place of inner peace, right? And it will be painful. Like if the emotion is around something major, such as a loss of a loved one, or a divorce or end of a relationship or something like that. I'm not saying it's not going to be painful. It is going to be painful. But the thing is, you need to experience that pain in order to release it. Because if you try to suppress it, it's going to cause suffering. It's going to be prolonged over time. So I hope that helps explain.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, about negative emotion as a toxin. It's not really a toxin. What happens is that if you suppress the negative emotion, it becomes a toxin in your body. It only becomes a toxin when you suppress it. You need to experience it. You need to experience all our emotions, negative and positive. Sometimes people even suppress their positive emotions. And the reason is so why would someone suppress a positive emotion? Because often wonderful things happen in our lives, but because of our upbringing or in past experience or what we've been told, we don't feel we deserve it. How many times do people have great things happen in their lives and they deny it? They think, well, I don't deserve this. Why is, so we can even suppress positive emotions, and that's wrong too. You need to experience those. You need to allow yourself to, feel it in its fullness, in its full glory, right? So, good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anytime. Any other questions anybody has? Now, I'm recording this, so I'm going to be sending this out to my email list. So if you're on my email list, you're all going to get a copy of this. And feel free to share it with anyone else who's interested. Any other questions right now? I'm just going to stop the screen share for now, since I'm not using my slides at this time. Okay, if there's no other questions, what I'm going to do is I still have to have, I know you're interested, Gabriella, but in order for it to be, in order for it to be something that that lasts and has longevity, I need to have a certain number of people who are interested to make it. Not that it's not worth my time, but I can help more people. The more people I can help, the more motivating and inspirational it is for me to do this. So what I am going to do though is once a month, I'm going to have a webinar like this on a different topic, which is going to be for free, right? It's going to be for free. I'm not going to charge anything. I haven't decided what next month's topic is going to be, but I have to give it some thought. But if you're on my email list, you'll get a message from me telling you when it's going to be, what the topic's going to be, and how to register for that. And for the person who just joined, we're kind of coming to the end of the webinar, but there's going to be a recording, and I'm going to be sending it out. If you're on my email list, you'll get that recording. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to be doing this once a month. I just have to decide what my next topic's going to be. Okay, great. Let me see. So any other questions from anyone? You can even type them in if you'd like. Okay. I think that brings us to, it's about an hour. So since there's no other questions, I'm going to bring it to an end. I'm going to, let me just, I'm going to stop the recording.